I want to welcome you to Thrive in the Word. We're studying in the book of 2 Peter, and today we're in 2 Peter, the first chapter, verse number 6. Now, it's taking us probably 2 sessions to go through verse number 6. So if you didn't watch the session right before this, I would encourage you to go back and listen to that. Now, we're building here. We're building upon what the Apostle Peter said to the Jewish believers. And again, the Jewish believers that he's writing to are suffering persecution. Peter knows that his end is near. He knows that he's going to be executed. Some people believe that he was executed within a month after he wrote this letter. We don't know exactly when that exact timing is, but we do know that Peter is writing his last words to the people that Jesus told him that he needed to pastor. And so these words are extremely, extremely important. Now we're in the 6th verse of chapter 1, and it says, "And in your knowledge, self-control." Now we talked about in the last podcast that he's talking about in your knowledge. And what Peter is beginning to do is he's beginning to build something. So the first thing is to have a knowledge. And we said that this knowledge is not a knowledge about biology or something like that. This is the knowledge of God's character, of who God is. And then he says in verse number 6, he says, in your knowledge, self-control, and in your self-control, perseverance. You see, we need to understand that God is a patient God. And when we see the character of God, when we have the knowledge of the character of God, these are the things that we see in God. And we see, first of all, his self-control. How many of you know that if God didn't have self-control, this world would have been wiped out a long, long time ago? It would have probably been wiped out when Eve took a bite of the apple and Adam went ahead and shared it. I mean, if God didn't have self-control, it would have been wiped out. And then the children of Israel, God's self-control was there with children of Israel. But not only was there self-control, but there's perseverance. Now, what is Peter talking about when he says perseverance? Now, perseverance is really an endurance. It's hanging in there. How many of you have ever done the same sin more than once? And you go to God and you say, God, I'm sorry. I agree that this is a sin. That's what confession is. That what I just did is a sin. And then God just forgives you. But then you do it again, and you do it again. You get angry, and you do it again, and you do it again. You know what? If you don't understand the perseverance of God, if you don't have that in your knowledge of God's character, you know what? Then you're going to get to the point where you're going to think that God will not forgive you again. And you see, we as believers also need to see that in God's character, because then we can receive perseverance by faith. And again, it's faith in the promises of God. We can be a people of perseverance. We can hang in there. We can endure. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever heard someone say, or maybe said it yourself, I can't take it anymore. I can't go any further? Well, one of the problems with saying that is that you don't know that how far God has taken us. You don't see that. You don't have a knowledge of that. But then also, you don't understand that God has given you everything pertaining to life and to godliness. You can survive. There is not such a thing as something too hard for you to do. You can do it. You can persevere. Actually, one of the ways that they translate this word perseverance from the Greek language is a cheerful endurance. Not just an endurance, but to endure with cheerfulness. Now keep in mind that Peter is writing to persecuted believers. Some of these people are facing the lions in the Colosseum in Rome. Some of these people have lost their families. Some of these people have lost their income. Some of these people have had to move because of persecution. And Peter is writing to them and he's saying, if you know the character of God, if you know how much God perseveres, how he doesn't ever give up, then you can by faith become a partaker of that same character. And how do you do that? By taking the promises of God. The next word that Peter uses here is godliness. Now, we could also say that godliness is it's holiness. It's the holiness of God. How many of you know that God is holy? There is not one sin in his life. If God were to sin, he would no longer be God. God is holy. You know, and that needs to be a revelation in the lives of all of us as believers, that God is holy. But here Peter is not just talking about knowing that God's holy, but in our knowledge, then we can apply the promises of God by faith, and then we ourselves can become holy. You see, one of the things that we need to understand is none of this is through our own strength. All of this is by faith in the promises of God. You can attempt to be holy in yourself. I've seen it. I've tried it myself. And you know what? It just doesn't work. What happens when men try to become holy in themselves, all you see is self-righteousness. But when you see the holiness of God, and when you know that you can become a partaker of that nature through the promises, and then you take those promises and you say, by faith, I receive the holiness of God. Do you know what happens? You become like God. Just think about that as you go through your day-to-day. Think about all of these things that God is, that they are all available to you right now by faith. Now, until we speak to you again, our prayer is that God will reveal himself to you, and in his revelation will bless you